there was this like phone number and you could send an SMS to this phone number, ask your question, and there'd be like an army of people who would go and figure out the answer and then text you back with the answer.
So even if it were mathematically possible to crack it, people still wouldn't because there's too much to lose in that case.
We'll own our own data. And, if some company wants to market to me, well, I will get paid because I'll give them the ability to see some information about me.
But imagine taking the internet away from the world and society would actually collapse.
The reality is it's like hyper connectivity between pretty much every person, give or take, and every business, and instantly available any piece of information you could dream of.
My first explorations with the internet, I think I was 17 in high school. And I discovered chat rooms, and all of a sudden I was talking to people, outside my high school, and I was like, oh my God, like, this is nuts.
For an advertising-free version of the show, check out patreon.com/Wall Street Wildlife. Welcome to a special episode of the Wall Street Wildlife podcast with Krzysztof and Luke. This week, we are answering the question, what does the future of the internet look like? And we'll be exploring blockchain technology. Now, I think I know a bit about this stuff, but Krzysztof is going to give me a lesson, dear listeners. Krzysztof, tell us in detail, what are we getting into today?
All right, Badger, I know you're skeptical and you're looking at me all funny, like future of the internet, like, yeah, right. But I got a bridge to sell you. So it was my spring break here in Austin, and I decided to really put my head down and do some serious learning about our topic du jour, the future of the internet. Because in part, this was inspired by the ARK Invest long thing. Exactly. I've been digging around the space for many years now, but it's part of it because if you remember, they feature technologies that will be built on blockchains as one of their main, call it future prognostications. So I ended up reading this book that came out a year ago called Read, Write, Own: Building the Next Era of the Internet by Chris Dixon, who is a general partner at, that fancy pants startup investing hub. AZ16 is the website. God, can't even remember what their joint is called, but they've invested in all kinds of huge companies and unicorns. So this guy, Chris Dixon, has serious street cred as an investor. Look him up. He's quite I think he was listed as the top investor in that kind of venture capital world. I don't know how to measure those statistics or whatever, but he's a serious dude. So I read this book. I made a mind map of it as I read it. So that's going to be available for our Patreons. And I thought this would be a wonderful way to spend our time, sort of me introducing to you what I learned in this book in a kind of Socratic dialogue method, so that we could see for real, what your questions are and what you're skeptical about, and see if I could answer all these questions. You ready?
I'm ready.
Okay.
And this is hot on the heels of me being guinea pig for our friend of the podcast, Zoe Ross, in last week's episode, where I had to guinea pig displaying my emotions. And, badgers don't have emotions. So yet again, putting me in an uncomfortable place as a guinea pig for your blockchain story.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So I want to start way back. And the reason I'm excited to do this now is because that for the first time in, I think ever, we have a pro-crypto president in administration. So you got to remember that for the last at least, I don't know how many years, let's call for brevity's sake, let's say even over the last 4 years, the administration in the United States was anti-crypto.
Yep.
you have all these people trying to build this thing, and we'll get to what this thing even is. But nonetheless, there's this huge shift politically and in terms of regulations. So that got me motivated to really figure out, okay, like how do we explain this stuff? What is it that people are now pro and what were they against? But in order to get to that, we need to hop into the Wayback Machine. Remember the internet back in 1998, 99, 2000? My first question to you is, do you remember, Luke, what during that era you thought the internet was?
Yeah, I guess I was like post-university. I did a computer science degree and I came rolling out of university, this fresh-faced tech guy in 93. So yeah, that was pre-internet. Like we had email and we had stuff like that, things that were kind of precursors to the internet. And yeah, I do remember like downloading stuff, using Gopher and using all sorts of other weird pre-HTML type technology. But yeah, if you wanted to go and find something, well, here's a good example, right? Like a precursor to Google was, in the UK at least, there was this like phone number and you could send an SMS to this phone number, ask your question, and there'd be like an army of people who would go and figure out the answer and then text you back with the answer. I remember using that in the 90s and being like amazed at this, like I can get the answer to anything, except I probably couldn't.
Yeah, right. My use case, my first explorations with the internet, I remember that I think I was 17 in high school and I discovered chat rooms, and all of a sudden I was talking to people, outside my high school, and I was like, oh my God, like, this is nuts, just talking to people, and I remember also looking for song lyrics, and I was fascinated by the fact that you could look up, yeah. So that was sort of the limit. There were certain limits to the imagination. Now let's fast forward to now. And how do you, an alien comes down and asks us, tell us about this internet thing you have. How do you explain what it is today versus what it was in 1998?
Yeah, there's like the tongue-in-cheek answer, which is like it's all like memes and cat videos, but like the reality is it's like hyper connectivity between pretty much every person, give or take, and every business, and instantly available any piece of information you could dream of. And today the web went from being like getting information to like the social web, where now like everyone's a content creator in one way or another, because you probably got like a Facebook or an Instagram or something else. And then it's also the backbone for like commerce and business, because it's kind of how companies interoperate with each other. Instead of like faxes and God knows what else they used to do, make phone calls, send letters.
Right. So the thing I'm sort of getting at the start is, in 1999, you could take away the internet and maybe I'd be sad for 4 hours because I wouldn't have my chat room buddies, and I'd have to go to the record store to look up, the lyrics by buying the thing. But you take away any human's internet today for like an hour and they go batshit crazy because they can't handle being offline for even an hour. But imagine taking the internet away from the world and the society would actually collapse, right? Because everything is connected. So hospitals would go, it's no longer what it was times 1,000.
Yeah.
Right?
Agreed.
That is the setup. That is the frame I want you to have for the rest of this episode, because I think the thesis I want to develop is that it seems to me in 2025, we are on the cusp of having a similar sort of, call it paradigm leap that can't really be felt because it's such a big leap, but the pieces, the ingredients are in place just like they were in, call it 1999, right? We had the modems, we had the interconnected web pages, and now what do we do with them, right? And then it took 2 decades for the world to change, but it did, right? So, the second question I have for you. What, and I actually think you might know the answer to this, at least the one I'm fishing for. What would you say is the internet's killer app?
It's killer app.
That's what the whippersnappers say, you know, when they want to call something like the must-have. Like, what is the most powerful or important feature of the internet?
I have no idea what you're fishing for, so I'm not going to give you the answer you want. What? I know. Like it. Wait. I mean, it's just that connectivity. I'm not going to say like email, but okay.
Yeah, no, yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah. No, that's pretty close. In his book, Dixon says that it's networks.
Yeah, but that is the internet.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, well, sort of, kind of, but
yeah, layers. Okay, without getting into like HTTPs and things, but yeah, okay.
Yeah, I mean, in general. So, without, I guess, getting too computer sciencey and geeky on this, there is like the internet is a network, but then what the internet allows is multiple kinds of networks, right?
Yeah.
But the idea is that human beings, that I guess what makes us the most powerful animal on the planet to some extent is that we've learned how to work together and build right on top of one another's progress. And we do that by getting together and creating pods, communities, and the internet just makes humans create these network things, right? Okay.
Yep.
So that's the killer app of the network. Now, next question for you. What determines, do you think, the outcome of a network?
Like what it...
There's different networks have different, call it purposes, right? And uses. What determines those?
Well, so the quality of the inputs and like the processing that takes place and how quick and accurate. Is that where we go?
And you would need to go back to a more primal step.
The number of participants in thing.
Even before that, one last shot.
Maybe something to... No, yeah, but going forward, so that's about cost of the thing.
Maybe, yeah, it's more of a meta. Maybe it's so primal that it's kind of a meta answer. It's the design, the way and this is like basic, like architect, basic, design theory / the form of something tells you how it's going to be used. So, think in terms of buildings, that a small little structure made out of wood says it's intended to be, call it cozy in the cabin, and you could have a little fireplace, right? But a 500-story or 100-story building made out of concrete is intended to house many peoples in urban settings, right? But design, right?
Okay.
This is a key point to all of this, that how you design a network determines what it will be used for. And I'm going to lecture at you now for a little bit.
Okay.
the original networks that we had were designed to democratize information. And those were email and the web. And their protocols, they were designed so that there is no central authority, right? And it's just everybody has equal access to it. Then on top of that, we designed networks that we currently have, which he calls the read-write networks that are sort of, it's the intention there to work backwards is it's to democratize publishing. So if you think about the platforms we use now, they enabled people to post things and create things, right? So think Facebook. The big reveal here, spoiler alert, of this whole episode is that blockchain technologies, aka crypto, which I'll get to in a second, are designed in such a way so that they democratize ownership.
Yeah. Which is, and like people talk about, say, the original internet as being like Web 1.0, and then like the social web and blogs and social media, that's like Web 2.0. And then like what you're describing, I think is the label like Web 3.0.
Correct. Exactly. Yep. To reiterate the point, because it's so key, as I start talking to you a little bit about the tech, remember that the reason I'm going to tell you about the tech is because the tech determines what you could do. So here's the most interesting question I have for you. And I think the one our audience will probably most respond to, or I'm curious with everyone who's listened to this, how you would respond to this. When I ask you, what is crypto? What do you say? Give me like, your most spontaneous human answer. What's crypto?
And by crypto, you mean cryptocurrency, not just because crypto is. Okay, anyway, just say crypto. I think you asked me, what is cryptocurrency?
No, actually, cryptocurrency is a specific use case. Okay. So just what is crypto?
What? Do you want me to go super computer sciencey and talk about like public key encryption?
No, I want you to do your best.
We got about all my nonsense, and I'll just give you like my answer to your question. What is crypto? Okay, so there's no central authority around something, which might be a currency, it might be some ledger, might be something else. So you don't have to rely on like an authority, a bank, a regulator, or somebody, an institution, which might be, would have the public interest in heart, but you still have to rely on them to get it right. And crypto, blockchain, you have whatever information it might be, but the authority is kind of distributed amongst all the members of that thing. So by using it, you become a disaggregated part of the authority.
Yeah, that's a pretty good answer. But let me make it even more concrete. The it that you refer to is a new kind of computer. So this is, I think, to me, as I was reading this book, I was like, and mind you, again, I've been doing this for years, but like something about his explanation in that sense, like made a light bulb go off in my head, because most people, I think when they think of a computer, they think of their laptop and or desktop, right? Or their phone, but they think of it as a physical thing, right? That they use to get to the internet. Fundamentally, crypto is a new kind of computer that inverts the hardware-software kind of primacy. The typical computers, or we think of them hardware first, right, on which software runs. Crypto is a computer that basically runs on software, and it's like you were saying, then redistributed everywhere. But fundamentally, it's a computer that stores info, and it has the capacity to run rules, and it has the capacity to act as a database that people can edit and share and trust. And again, it's the software that dictates things as opposed to, say, the specs on your laptop.
If I can sort of suggest like another way of saying the same thing, I think, and see if I've got what you're trying to say right. Like, if I want to use a computer, so I could have like my local computer, which is my laptop, my phone, whatever it might be, and it's here with me in the room. I could use the cloud, which is essentially somebody else's computer. So like maybe the cloud for me, if I'm a business, might be Amazon or Google or Microsoft Azure, but it's just someone else's computer in a massive data center, which might be all around the world, but it's controlled by that organization. And if they decide to shut you down, well, that's it. You don't have any more cloud because they just turned you off. And then this distributed kind of blockchain computer is a bit like, well, it's distributed and it's everybody else's computer who's using that blockchain, and they're doing my processing for me. So I don't have to rely on like Google to stay in business, even though they're going to stay in business, right? I don't have to rely on them. I don't have to worry about them shutting down my processing, because you would have to literally shut down everybody else who is using the blockchain to turn off my thing. So it becomes, again, distributed.
Right. Yeah. I think that's a good nuance to have named, that even something like the cloud, which we don't feel as a physical thing, it's still hardware first, and it's dependent on an entity that's out of control, versus a computer that is by definition everywhere, is a hold up and different thing. So that's one of the main takeaways. If somebody now asks, or to our listeners, if somebody ever asks you, what is crypto? My guess is that while before you might have said, oh yeah, it's some kind of coin, or it's some sort of like currency, or it's some sort of doohickey, this, that, or other thing, now you could give the much more fundamental and serious answer, which is it's a new form of computing, or you could even say it's a new computing movement, so to speak, that enables things that have not been enabled before. So
the small nuance, like it doesn't have to be like you could take, say, the original Satoshi like version of Bitcoin, and that wasn't about doing processing. That was literally just about having a distributed ledger and having like tokens on the ledger, and they represented money, be Bitcoins. But then like that whole world evolved, and it became about not just storing information, but doing processing.
Right. So that ended up, it's interesting. That's where most people start, because that's the obviously cultural dominant thing, but that's just one use case of how you would use this non-centralized computer. But it turns out there's like the internet in 1999, where I could only think of looking for lyrics and chatting to some sophomore freshman at USC. Like the possibilities for distributed computing are actually only up to our imaginations, and we haven't even discovered what many of those will be, but that's for a little bit later. So let me pause there and switch tacks. It turns out there's a villain in this book. There's a clear and outright villain that Dixon does not mince words about. I mean, like, he's saying this. I mean, I thought he was pretty level-headed, but in this regard, he doesn't have too many kind things to say about a particular entity, and that is the corporate network. So this is where a little bit of, I don't know, maybe, well, I don't know. I'm curious to see what your reaction is, but here's how he paints corporate networks. And by the way, here are the examples of corporate networks: YouTube, X, Facebook, Instagram, Uber, Airbnb, TikTok, right? These are, I mean, across of all of those, you have the majority of the world's call it commerce happening, right?
Yep.
He paints them villainously over and over again and says that building something on a corporate network now or before, but especially now, is like building on a broken foundation, because the way these kinds of networks work is that first, as you were saying earlier, they attract they attract people. That's the only way the network gains value. So there's all these incentives. Come to our platform. It's great over here, right? And then after a certain point, an inflection point is met, the network then, quote unquote, turns evil and leverages their power because they can, and because it's corporate by definition. They have a fiduciary duty to extract as much value as they possibly can from their users, because lo and behold, their users can't go anywhere else. And that's by design. And according to his view of the world, this has been now historically documented. And if the pattern follows this particular story each and every time without exception.
Yeah.
And so that's
a good recent example of this is like you listed Elon Musk X in there. Like, you're right. Like, so X doesn't really have shareholders anymore. Like, probably a couple of big private individuals, but essentially it's a private organization. But Musk, as the CEO of this thing, has a fiduciary responsibility to generate revenue for the owners. If you're a public company, it's like you're legally obliged to do that. That's the role of like the board. But X also kind of purports to be this platform for free speech. And much as Musk wants anybody to be able to say anything, like he's bound by actual laws that mean, he's not allowed to have certain content on there, and he has to take steps to essentially moderate it in some way or another. So there are good reasons for that. You wouldn't want certain information being disseminated willy-nilly. And because it's owned by like a corporate structure or an individual that a regulator can go and talk to and say, hey, you've got to shut this down. Well, the police, they will fulfill their job and they will do that. And they'll have to oblige or will have to go to jail.
Hey, listeners. My name is Brett Schaefer, one of the hosts of the Chit Chat Stocks podcast. On our show, we do comprehensive stock research reports, interview analysts, and learn from great investors. And we have coverage on stocks like Airbnb, Nubank, Mercado Libre, and many others. Plus, we cover all the hot financial news on our weekly investing power hours. We have episodes for all types of investors, and think if you listen to this podcast, you will enjoy ours as well. Follow the Chit Chat Stocks podcast on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts, and start discovering new investments today.
Right, exactly. So you did a great job previewing what some of these, like why it's a broken foundation. So there's platform risk, by which you said it pretty well. There's a massive loss of innovation, it turns out, because when you have a big boss who runs the whole show, what the little people, little developers can and can't do is not up to them. And three, perhaps most damning, is that it's sort of a black box because it's built on algorithms that you don't really know and social values that may be one thing one day, another thing another way. There's the whole issue of deplatforming and who really gets to say. And this is actually, as I was reading this, Luke, I was thinking about us all the time because, we're growing our YouTube channel, right? But it's just so obvious when looked in this light. In the end, we have zero control. They could turn off our channel tomorrow, no explanation given, and we have zero say about any of it.
Yeah.
And we're small fish, right? We're at the early stages, right? But some people, if you think about lives and creators who do this for a living, many, many stories where they've lost their livelihood and, in a sense, not given a reason.
Yeah. Or just got like demonetized because the platform decided, for whatever reason, that the algorithm should no longer prioritize the stuff that you were maybe making your livelihood from, which is why, like in this business, really the best business, or the only one that's truly when you control yourself, is having like an email newsletter. If you've actually got email addresses, like you've got those, no one can take them away from you. If they want to shut you down, well, you just move your email provider and then carry on.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the problem, I think, is very clear. It's just, I'm trying to highlight the fact that because this has been the model for the last 20 years, we've sort of adapted to it and we've grown to think, okay, this is just how things are, right? And we have to play the game. Like you and I we're now on Patreon, right? So that's great because that's a different kind of model, right? I write my philosophy stuff on Substack. That's a different model. It's a little closer to the original email-based, protocol, and you own, as you were saying, your people. You own their contact info. But anyway, so if the corporate network is the villain, then this entire premise of the future of the internet posits blockchain technology as the hero. So let me very briefly tell you my understanding of blockchains. I don't want to actually, this is getting into the weeds a little bit, and I hope not to overdo it. So maybe I won't. And if any of our listeners have a question, you could ask us in the comment section because I don't want to bore people. But here's 2 quotes that I found fascinating. 1, if you asked what people needed in 1989, nobody would have said a decentralized network of information nodes that are linked using hypertext. Right? So that's, again, going back to this notion that what the internet was and what it became is too far for people to imagine. 2, this is from the founder of Ethereum, Vitalik Buterin. He said, whereas most technologies tend to automate workers on the periphery doing menial tasks, blockchains automate away the center. Instead of putting the taxi driver out of a job, blockchain puts Uber out of a job and lets the taxi drivers work with the customers directly. So the short version of blockchains is that they're a technology that enable digital ownership. Going back to the YouTube question, do we own anything on YouTube? The answer is no. We own nothing. And based on what I told you earlier, that if you think of crypto/blockchains as a decentralized computer running on software, we can add to that the fact that it's transparent. Blockchains enable transparency, and everything is authenticated as true because of math. And that's technically the crypto part. The crypto part just means that a bunch of math geeks got together and figured out a way to basically make all these individual software computers work in such a way that when one says one thing and another one says another thing, they all agree, and it can't be hacked. Or, in theory, that's the strength of it because it's distributed. But that's the only place crypto really comes into place, cryptographic truth. So that's basically the technical aspect of blockchains. One additional point, though, is to add that unlike, say, a major corporation owning a computer that's, say, way more powerful than any other computer on the planet, as in the AI race and how many NVIDIA chips can you get your hands on, in this paradigm, all code is created equal. And this is an important point to consider, that if you really take seriously the fact that all that crypto is a bunch of computers, but it's really software, then you begin to realize that everybody has access to the same software programs, and one software program is not, quote unquote, better than another because it's all in the open. You could copy and paste, right? You can't copy and paste an NVIDIA chip. Okay, so that's blockchains are that which basically make the software network run. I briefly need to mention tokens, because it turns out, Luke, in the history of the internet's growth, the previous versions of the internet, there were some people that were really, call it, unhappy with the corporate network model. They could see where it was going, right? This extortionist, monopolistic, oligarchical thing. And they tried to basically compete with them because they saw that email and the web still worked for free, right? So they tried to create different versions of like protocol networks. RSS was the most famous one, but in the end, nothing survived, nothing lived because basically not enough money. Basically, those people were relying on volunteer organizations and nonprofits and, trying to skimp funding to run the computers they needed. And you're just not going to outcompete, say, Google, that's taking in billions of dollars via ad revenue, right? So tokens are basically the mechanism through which network blockchains get funded. For our purposes as investors, I kind of think it's okay to think of them sort of analogously like we do stocks, right? Companies get capitalized via some combination of debt and equity, right? And some other potential shenanigans in the back door channels, but mostly it's debt and equity, right? And what is equity? Like, people give you money, you get a share of the company, right? And if the company prospers, you do too. Tokens, for our purposes, are the ways that blockchains offer, call it, shares in their network. And you could buy tokens. And then once you have the token, you own some share of that network's activity. Make sense? And it's an innovation over protocol networks because protocols just didn't have them. And it's an innovation over corporate networks because corporate networks on the network level don't allow you to own anything, right? So, like, to make this obvious again, on YouTube, we do not get paid. We have no, the way we get paid is via like a secondary thing via ad revenue and stuff, but that has nothing to do with actual ownership of the platform. Okay. So the thesis here with the token stuff is that the digital world in general would be a better place if ownership were as widespread as it is in the physical world. Which kind of makes sense when I say it, right? Like, when you go out to the physical world, when we were out in the physical world, people own, it's like we own our cars, we own our houses, or we rent them from somebody, right? We own a bicycle. If I have a book, I own it. Like, to own stuff is kind of like a crucial way that humans exist. But then it's weird when we think about it that the places where we spend most of our time online, we don't own anything. Tokens are a kind of solution to that. So the next piece of this is that the software on which the crypto computer runs is community owned. That might not seem like a big deal, until you kind of think of it, and this is a quote, I think, something that software is the equivalent of Buffett's great compounding interest is the one great wonder of the world. Do you know what I'm talking about? Or that compounding interest is a great eighth wonder of the world or something like that. The fact that anybody can log onto their laptop if they know what they're doing and copy the same code that the blockchain network runs on or Ethereum network runs on, and then copy it and then basically use that to build their own thing, means that the rate at which, say, progress happens and the rate at which, in this case, reusability happens is astounding, like compounding, after 25 years. Nobody has to rewrite any of these codes, and then the rate at which coders start building and building just starts growing and growing because, again, you're not reinventing stuff, you're just adding stuff. This is technically called encapsulation. Geeky word, but it comes up later. It's the idea that one person makes it, another one uses it, but the other one using it doesn't even have to understand the 2 decades that went into making the first thing. You just use it because it's there on your computer. The fact that this software is community-based, open sourced, has one other really crucial distinction. I don't know if you remember hearing something like this, Luke. When Google was, I guess, in its growth phase, they were saying that their motto, company-wide motto, was something like, "Don't be evil."
Yeah.
Remember that?
Yeah, which they famously struck out of their mission a couple of years ago.
Right. And to some extent, it's sort of hit, like I was saying, it's in their DNA as a corporation to make as much money as possible. When you have community-owned software, that motto changes to can't be evil. From don't be evil to can't be evil. And the reason is, again, based on the math and the decentralized way the open source software runs, so that one person who, say, wants to take it over literally can't because they're not in the majority, or it's written in the code that it can't be changed and is going to be forever X. So this is one, as a sidebar, right? This is one of the strengths of Bitcoin, as you could see. In the code, it says can't ever be more than 21 million Bitcoins. Many people, I'm sure, would like that number to be higher, but too bad. And that ends up, at this moment in time, being one of its redeeming qualities, that it's not even do we want to or do we not, it can't be. And there's no way to change it unless you got the majority of the people to cooperate. But that's
that's the key point, isn't it? Because anybody, and probably every day, people fork, create a different version of Bitcoin where maybe, and many of them probably have an unlimited number of tokens or a different number of tokens. But unless they get adopted by the majority of people, it's just in obscurity. It's irrelevant. I want to just I was smirking a bit when you said, this stuff prevents people from being evil, because it kind of depends on your definition of evil. You're using it in a particular way to say.
Actually, wait a second. Let me clarify. The technical point that's important is not whether people are evil or it's not the ethical quality. It's that they can't. It's more about moving from a values motto, we don't want to be evil, to it's simply not technically feasible in the way we're talking about this. It's not technically, you can't, maybe forget the word evil.
Yeah.
And replace it more with greedy or whatever. But the point is, no matter what you may want, you can't do it based on math.
Yeah. Like you can't kind of rewrite history. Maybe even greed is like a bad term, because obviously there are some evil people doing greedy things and launching like meme coins and doing rug pulls and like
we're going to get to that.
And, yeah. So like you can certainly do bad things with all these technologies, like you can with pretty much any technology if you have bad intent. But what you're trying to say here is, like if I did a thing and if it gets adopted and everyone wants to use that thing like Bitcoin, nobody can come in and change that thing and shut me down and mess with it. Like the core principles, it is what it is, and that's
correct.
That's
correct. And that's a subtle That's a subtle distinction. Like and I'm going to get to the circus side of this in a bit, but if you go to the circus or a casino, it's not the casino's fault that it's going to take your money. It says it right there, right? We're a circus, we're a casino, your odds are low. So that's not, so evil is allowed, right? That's not the point. The greater point is that you can't change the rules.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. I also want to mention that part of the incentive here, which I think you'll appreciate, is because you mentioned it in the previous Wall Street Wildlife podcast, Jeff Bezos saying, your margin is my opportunity, right? Just for our listeners' pleasure, let me mention that the take rate, meaning, actually, how would you define take rate?
It's like if a company facilitates some sort of transaction, it's like the earnings they make by making that thing happen.
Yeah. Sort of skimming off the top, right? Like the guy gets like the middleman sort of gets his cut.
Yeah.
Right. The take rate on YouTube is close to 100%. I'm sorry, Facebook is close to 100%. YouTube is about 45%. And even Apple, notoriously charges up to something like 30% in their app store, right? I mean, 30%, right? These are pretty large take rates.
Yep.
Because nobody owns call it the blockchain network, the take rates are, I think at the highest end, the network that sells NFTs and stuff is something like 2.5%. called OpenSea, and a network like Ethereum, that their take rate is 0.06%. So this is another key structural difference. Once you're using blockchain technology, the money that is swimming around in that network stays there and no one guy is stuffing his pocket. So that's really important. It brings us to an important quality of this, the ethics. This is what surprised me too about reading this book, because I never really thought about it. And that's not true. I did think about it before, but not in this like stark contrast that you have all of a sudden a villain in the corporate networks. And if you have a villain, you get to have a hero potentially. And why is the hero a hero? Because they're fighting for values that fundamentally represent, call it the little guy. And so really it's this war at this moment in 2025 between a corporation that is owned by a few versus a community that is owned by everybody. And so blockchains are a counterweight to extortionism. And the slogan here is like, if you want to get all hippy dippity, the internet built by everybody for everybody. If you want to really go back to and wear your bell bottoms and back to the summer of peace and love, that's what you believe, right? Like that there's something like the internet ought to be governed by everybody because everybody uses it. And so let me move on to this notion of serious tokens, because you brought up the test case that is the most notorious thing about crypto, the circusy stuff. I bring it up all the time. At this point in the evolution of Web3, I think you're seeing similar things that you saw back in 1999, companies that are basically existing built on promises and dreams, but not offering anything serious. And fortunes were won and lost because it was pure speculative mania, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't know what the percentage is, right? But something like 5% of the internet.com era busted because there was nothing there, right? Same kind of shit is happening today in crypto. A bunch of these networks using these technologies have sprouted, but the way they use their tokens is primarily to speculate on the price action. That's kind of their end all and be all. If you think of any celebrity tokens, what is that? Like it's a bunch of tulips, right? There's no product, there's no anything besides game of musical chairs. You enter that room knowing, right, like a casino, that you're just trying to out hustle everybody else. And if you win, cool. If you lose, too bad for you, but that's the name of the game. And it's sort of like, it's in the rules. But serious tokens also exist. It's just that while all the loud, crazy maniacs in the casino are running around shouting at each other, right? That gets the headline, that grabs the attention. Meanwhile, the people actually building stuff and creating, value, which takes time, which takes effort, those tokens are not being talked about because speculation is not involved because that's not the name of the game. And to that end, very briefly, I'll say they can be valued quite similarly to the way we value stocks. Ethereum brings in money. People are paying to use that network. So now that you have money coming in, you have steady cash flows and you have the number of tokens available. What does that give you? A price per earnings, right? And as the network grows and you have more people paying fees, the revenue goes up, right? And then, it's the same things we do with analyzing stocks. It's just not what you hear about at this point because there's so few of them. So my, if I have an ask of all of our listeners who are still with us, I would say this is a moment where you have to do a lot of work yourself to reframe mentally, cognitively, the fact that just because something is the loudest and the most dominant use does not make that use the true use or the good use or the future that we're talking about here. So, talking about the future, this is kind of where I'm going to start landing the plane. This is why I'm excited about this. Because if you believe enough, everything I've been saying, then you're looking at a moment in time where with pro-crypto policy now in place, developers who have now been building this stuff for over a decade plus, the technology is now good enough, fast enough. The compute itself is no longer sort of the bottleneck. And you have millions of these developers, people creating this code nonstop. We're exactly, I think, at the same moment that we were 25 years ago with the internet. And now it's a question of, okay, what can we build on this that will compete with the corporate networks that won't let us have any fun, right? They're just about taking from us. So this is entirely, everything I just said is basically about creating a more fair revenue distribution model for anybody that uses and creates on the internet. What does that mean, anybody? Well, let's start with me and you, right? We already know even though Patreon is not does not run on blockchains, we do know that their take rate is something like 10% as opposed to Facebook's 100, right?
Yep.
And they're giving us more control over our community, right? Versus YouTube, same thing, right? We're basically incentivized more as creators to grow our community, and we get to do more with it, right? So it's more fair. That's why we like that model. But now think of this more globally, like really zoom out, and you get to something like an example of a gamer. What the gaming industry is now like $180 billion business, right? Any gamer now could sort of play their game on a blockchain network. And if that network has in its code something like a revenue distribution thing that says top gamers get 10% of the network's revenues, and then second tier get whatever percent, then everybody gets paid, including people that make the games. Or like some normal person might, level up their warrior to, their wizard to level 20, and they could sell that wizard to somebody else for real money. But the whole point is that it's fair and there's a shot at giving back to their creators.
And because I agree with what you're saying, I wasn't sure what kind of conversation we were going to have, and I see where you're going now. And I see you sort of framed me as being like the skeptic. I'm not the skeptic about this stuff. I truly believe this is actually quite important. And it's not just about getting paid, though. To me, more importantly, it's about privacy and control of your data. So like if I've got, we have to use Instagram, even though I freaking hate it, right? And Facebook Meta own a lot of information about me because I'm on Facebook, because that's how I communicate with my mum. And they could do bad when they do bad things with that data, right? They use it to target me with adverts. They use it, they sell it, they use it in lots of different ways. Where like a Web3 version of this stuff, and these things do exist. They're not widely adopted yet because it's kind of for the geeks at the moment. But when these things are like widely rolled out and adopted, we'll own our own data. And if some company wants to market to me, well, I will get paid because I'll give them the ability to see some information about me. I won't do that case by case. I'll set some parameters and I'll get paid, and I will get paid rather than the platform getting paid.
Right. Yes. There's a whole, I'm going to take you down some other, dystopian versions of the future, and not some dystopian versions, but yes, that's part of it. To go back to maybe some of these more fun use cases, remember, again, go back to 1999, right? What we thought is possible versus what grew out of it. Example, musicians. On Spotify, the obvious winner platform in the world, right? How many percent of musicians make greater than 50,000 a year? Meaning like borderline poverty. 50 per year is in poverty, but it's like not exactly that much these days, right?
Right.
What's the percentage?
Of all the musicians, I think I don't know the stats, but it's going to be like 0.1% or something, like tiny.
Yeah, it's tiny. I believe it's 2%.
Okay, right.
But basically, if you're basically you have to be a superstar rock act or whatever to have any hope whatsoever to make a living, right, off Spotify. Versus,
and I think it wasn't like was it a Taylor Swift thing? Like some major global artist called them out on how much even they were earning. Like their take rate is huge. Yeah.
Yeah. No, the more you start thinking like this, the more I think, at least I did when reading this book, I started feeling like the injustice of it all, like the kind of like I'm getting mad, like, wait, this isn't right. Versus, in this world, imagine, just think with me for a second. Some group of developers creates a blockchain network all about music, and they code it in such a way that a musician that sells whatever, they mathematically program every time somebody plays your song, you get 5 cents, right? Then it becomes sort of faded, right? And nobody can change with that. Nobody can mess with that. No, Spotify can't all of a sudden switch the rules on you. But all of a sudden, people have a fair shot. So, and then you get even more creative and say, oh, this thing, because it's actually a contract that lives on a computer, we could say every time somebody downloads my song, they get a free ticket to my concert. Or if they listen to my songs 1,000 times, which can be documented, they get backstage passes or whatever you could dream up, right? I mean, it's a whole new world of possibilities that exist. Okay, 2. So basically there's all this art stuff, creator stuff, right? But then how I got involved with this, with Chainlink as my biggest position, if you remember that, that's because of what is possible in the financial industry. And this gets complicated quick, but the corporate monoliths in the financial industry are things like Visa, MasterCard, PayPal, Square. I mean, there's a bunch of them, right? But they have take rates that, relatively speaking, are high. Versus the possibility that a DeFi, decentralized finance network, basically gets rid of all take rates. So all of a sudden, finance itself becomes like a public utility that is free for everybody. That's a whole new world. That's a whole new world that basically that fundamental layer you don't pay for. What people build on top of that is where things get interesting and creative. And my main man, the co-founder of Chainlink, has been on the record now for years and years saying this is inevitable. It's no longer like a pipe dream. It's just what's going to happen because the incentives for all these companies to do it are too high for them not to. Then you get creative with things like all of a sudden micropayments. If basically you're not paying, money to a middleman, if that goes away, then micropayments become possible. So you could all of a sudden start paying like a penny or 2 pennies to do something like send a song to somebody where, it's so minimal that you don't notice it, but globally it adds up. So basically your computer becomes your own MasterCard, right? Everybody becomes like their own version of being a MasterCard. Okay, we could play forever in these kinds of scenarios. Let me turn to a little bit of the dark side, which you alluded to. We learned from Google that when you have a monopoly, there's overwhelming incentive to basically game the system in your own favor, right? So when you Google something, Google's going to put the companies that they favor at the top, that pay them the most, right? Or Amazon privileges its own products near the top, and you have no say in that, right? So the distribution is who distributes the content wins. Well, you and I know better than anyone, buddy, that AI is here. And AI is going to basically accelerate all this. AI, as we talked about some previous episodes, has Google itself in its crosshairs, right? Why use Google when you could get even better info with some chatbot, right?
Yep.
So this brings us clearly into this crosshairs of an explicit dystopian future where if we sort of as humanity don't think about this carefully, we are looking at a possibility where basically, call it, all of the internet is run by, call it, an AI overlord that does everything better than anybody else, but there is no, call it, alternative. Like even the corporations themselves are destroyed. versus a world in which you could say blockchain technology has advanced enough where individual networks are still in the hands of the people. And this is the same, I mean, by analogy, I could say, sure, AI computers are now the best chess players and the best Go players in the world, right? So we know they could do those things better than anybody, but we still play chess, right? Why? Because we acknowledge that there's an art and beauty to playing chess on the human level. This is, I think, the moment where as AI takes off, the blockchain people are saying it can't just be about that, because we know where that ends. The robots running everything and humans are, cogs in the basement working for pennies on the dollar because that's the model. I know that sounds grim, but as I'm reading this, I'm like, holy shit, that's actually like, hey, why wouldn't that be the case, right? Well, of course, that's we've seen it play out over the last 25 years. Here's the last example I think you'll find fascinating, because you, as an investor, are deeply concerned with this issue. Deepfakes. We know, right, in like 5 years' time, the level of phishing scams and the level of like deceptive practices are going to be fucking out of control, to the point where humans won't be able to know what's what, and God knows what's going to happen to like civilized society if we're not careful. One way to protect ourselves against all of that is basically start building on blockchain networks that allow a sort of verification system in the code that says, okay, if you publish an article on our network, this article has to be vetted by at least 60% of our users, right, on the blockchain. Once that number is reached, we publish it because we know that it's not a fake, or whatever system of balances, but it's retaining the control on the side of the creators and the software rather than the hardware.
Yeah, like in the future, if you wanted a Krzysztof and Luke Wall Street Wildlife podcast about any topic of your choice, right, you just ask your model to produce that, and you can do it now, right? You're just going to get these two generic, like Google kind of voices doing the podcast for you, but you'd be able to get like the two of us swearing and talking nonsense, and it would look like us, and you'd have no way of knowing. What this world lets us do is kind of like cryptographically like prove that this is actually an authentic Wall Street Wildlife podcast episode that really came from us. Maybe we're generating it with bots ourselves and we got our feet up sipping like banana daiquiris on a beach, but it's right. Like the legit content, not someone else's version of our content.
Right. And we'd be able to prove it, and we'd be able to basically secure it in much the way that the Bitcoin network now is deemed uncrackable, because it's both a numbers game, a math game, and game theory. Like when you add the game theory element to it, it's in everyone's best interest not to crack it. So even if it were mathematically possible to crack it, people still wouldn't, because there's too much to lose in that case. So it's this combination of humanity now has a chance to sort of, forestall or prevent this dystopian future before it gets out of hand. And we know that the developers are already there and we're already building it. And that's, I think, why so much of the crypto community obviously voted for Trump, because they're like, finally, somebody understands this problem well. And I mean, I don't like Trump's character whatsoever, but it's almost like he might be right for the wrong reason, because I sort of think of him, like grifting first versus ethics first. But it so happens that he's supporting, I think, the more ethical platform despite all the other stuff. But that's neither here nor there. Let me land it this way, Luke. Here's the summary. Here's the overall pitch. The internet is now about to take a huge leap forward. And it's going to do this by solving an architecture problem. We figured out a technology called blockchains that basically design networks better. The question is, who do we want to control the world? The digital world that basically now is becoming a greater and greater part of our lives, with the metaverse on its way and all of our things, right? Our digital and blend of digital and physical and more digital, right? Who do we want to own that? If we say to ourselves corporations, then we're going to be slaves. What's the alternative? This stuff is the alternative. Blockchains are the only credible known architecture for building networks with social benefits of protocol networks and competitive advantages of corporate networks. That's it. Like this is it. And so that is why, I guess from the investing standpoint, I'm not shilling any one particular token. The only company I, own is Chainlink, which is a protocol itself, which might be a little confusing, but Chainlink is what's going to allow the DeFi networks to do their thing. And after finishing this book, man, I was like, this is serious stuff. This is like the future of humanity, the future of civilization, the future of like countering whatever dystopian things may or may not happen. And whoever the winning companies are, whoever the say specific winners are, that's going to be the fun part to sort of like, speculate a little bit or place your bets strategically here and there. My point in wanting to record this to you is to say the foundational technology, I think good investors, smart investors would look at this as a moment equivalent to 1999 and say, oh my God, the opportunities here, if done well, are astounding. And those who are right and early basically change the world. And we could do it again. You just got to start looking and thinking of it in a very different way from the way most people look at it. So that's it. Woo! I'm tired.
Thanks for sharing your wisdom on the topic with us, Krzysztof. I know you read voraciously and you make notes voraciously, so it's good for you to share your thoughts on this important topic. You're right. I didn't come into this as a skeptic, and I'm not a skeptic now. But I think you landed the plane well, saying, do we want to be? Are we going to sleepwalk our way into being slaves of corporations? Are we going to take back control? I'm a geek, and I had, for example, Signal on my phone for years. Trouble is, nobody else wants to use this technology, and so I fear that we're going to sleepwalk our way into the dystopia. I don't know what the wake-up call could be.
Well, I guess I suppose I'll answer this last bit this way. I think there's something to be said about generations. And you and I are, I hate to say it because we're both still so devilishly handsome, but, we're not the generation that was born with an iPhone in hand, right? And I like, as an investor, the motto, go where the developers are. That's proved very successful as a principle to me. And the developers, so many smart, hardworking, really dedicated young people are all in on the crypto stuff. They do not, as a generation, want to go and work at Meta or Google selling ads. They're like, oh my God, we have what? We have the internet, we have pocket supercomputers, and we have AI, and we have this new network structure that basically allows us to own the things that we build and create and share. And you want us to do what? You want us to work for the man? I will take that bet. I am officially taking that bet that, as fringe as this stuff might seem right now, call it 3 years from now, when you and I are having this conversation in 2028, I will be really surprised if we don't already have like a call it popular culture level new network built on blockchains that is directly taking it to one of these incumbents. That's my bet. That's my call.
Yeah, I like it. I hope it is the case. I hope products like Brave succeed because they are a different model.
Yeah, I mean, it's exciting, and the ethics of this, the value of this, all of this stuff just gets me really excited, and that's what I hope maybe our listeners can take away from this message. There's a lot more at stake here than a geeky technology, and so we welcome your feedback, comments over on patreon.com/Wall Street Wildlife. We love hearing from you, and that is where I am going to post the long, extensive mind map I made from this book. I left out a bunch of stuff in this conversation because it would have been 3 hours long instead of just an hour 15. So check us out over on Patreon.
Are you ready to become a beast of an investor?
Your journey starts right here. All right.
A reminder that the people on this program may hold positions in the companies that are mentioned. Buying and selling stock carries financial risk, which could include loss of capital. The views in this program should not be taken as personalized advice. Before acting on any of the information provided, listeners are encouraged to consult a financial or tax professional.